Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 444th New Social Environment. I'm Anya, the events assistant here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and the privilege of being your MC today for a conversation between Christy Rupp and Eleanor Heartney. We're thrilled to have the poet Bob Holman here, who will read to close today's program. A few notes before we get started. The Rail acknowledges that Black Lives Matter, and that here in New York, we are on the Napehoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to check the chat for a living document of resources and actions, which I will post shortly. And over the past 21 years, the Brooklyn Rail has undertaken a miraculous journey, bringing together in a single monthly publication art, music, dance, film, theater, and literature, along with thoughtful social and political meditations. As a small nonprofit, we need your support. This December, we are fundraising $150,000 in 31 days. Your contribution will directly support our writers, guest artists, production staff, and operations of the Rail for the coming year. So please check the chat for more information and links to donate. And now to introduce today's guest and host. Born in Rochester, New York, Christy Rupp began her career as an artist in the 1980s at Fashion Moda, an alternative art space in the South Bronx. She graduated with an MFA from Maryland Institute College of Art, Rinehart School of Sculpture in 1977. Rupp has taught in a number of universities, including Bard College, Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, School of Visual Arts, Brooklyn College, and Lehman College. Rupp's sculptures incorporate the science of animal behavior with metaphoric allusion of isolation and alienation, and her compositions are often related to environmental issues. And New York-based art critic Eleanor Heartney is the author of numerous books on contemporary art. Heartney is a contributing editor for Art in America and has written extensively for publications, including Art News, the New Art Examiner, the Washington Post, and the New York Times. She's authored several noteworthy books about art, such as Art and Today, co-author of After the Revolution, Women Who Transformed Contemporary Art, winner of the Susan Koppelman Award, and most recently, Doomsday Dreams, The Apocalyptic Imagination in Contemporary Art. She is an editor-at-large for the Brooklyn Rail. So without further ado, Eleanor and Christy, please take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Anya. And thank you again, Brooklyn Rail. Well, this conversation is actually in celebration of Christy's new book. Christy, shall we hold it up here? Can everyone see? This is Christy's new book. And it's a wonderful kind of compendium of her work over the last, how many decades, Christy?
4.5.
4.5 decades. And we're going to be, a lot of the things that we'll be talking about today actually are things that are chronicled in the book. Do you want to tell us, though, a little bit about why, first of all, why it's called Noisy Autumn, and a little bit about the book itself?
Oh, okay. Well, Noisy Autumn is a reference to Silent Spring, and it is turning 60 this year or last year, depending on how you count it. And I kind of had this idea, like, if we're going down, if the climate is gonna collapse, then we don't want to go quietly. But I also was just trying to have kind of an ironic response to Silent Spring while also paying homage to its amazing inspiration and longevity. That I don't know if people have checked this out, but chemical companies to this day maintain websites trashing Rachel Carson for telling people that pesticides were bad. And all she really did was say that 90% of insects are beneficial to humans. So it's not like she came after their bottom line, but they certainly have attacked her well past her death.
So this is a wonderful homage to her as well.
Yeah.
And a reminder of how important she is.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to turn now, I think, to a PowerPoint. These are images of things that are in the book. And Christy, let's just do a quick little skip and run through your career, starting with your earliest work. Here, this goes back to the late 70s. You want to tell us a little bit about what we're looking at here?
Well, this was called the patrol. And when I moved to New York in the mid to late 70s, we all know the city was financially on the rails with Gerald Ford telling us to go to hell. And the result for all of us that were around was lots of cheap space, lots of places to get together, lots of integration with music and film and art, fashion, you name it. And it was very alive. And I had come out of grad school studying animal behavior and really interested in the science of animal behavior and connecting the science aspect to conceptual art, which is what I was taught in college. It seemed to me to be presented kind of like science. So I was kind of interested in looking for science in the art world. And I had done lots of little experiments with bugs and things. I'm not experiments, but observation, photographing them and studying their behavior. And very soon it became clear that the city was alive with this other presence, which was rats. And they were very, very easy to study at the time because they were everywhere. And where I lived downtown in the Wall Street area wasn't really thought of as a residential area. And we had the garbage strike in '79 for 3 weeks in the spring. It was a warm spring. And it's unthinkable today that garbage would be left to pile up for weeks and weeks at a time when it was hot out.
Yeah. I think this image really gives you a sense of how different the city was at that time. And we have another great image. If we can get the next image, please. Yeah. So besides doing these stencils, you also did dimensional objects.
Yeah. Well, I'm a sculptor, so. As we were doing more and more work with collaborative projects, a crowd I fell in with early in my time in New York, we would just meet in abandoned buildings and kind of be crew or shoot videotapes. I never really made videotapes, but there was a lot of working in abandoned spaces, abandoned buildings. And it occurred to me that the rats were kind of integral to the coming apart of this old architecture. And I just want to point out that this work was never a defense of rats. It was only to point out that the city is an ecosystem with a delicate balance. And in the years that have gone by since then, I realized there's such a huge difference between encountering a rat outdoors and seeing one indoors. Because really indoors, they have the upper hand. They're much more adapted to our spaces than we are. And I think that one reason we're so afraid of them is they do function so much better in our spaces than we do. And just look around the streets today and see these sidewalk sheds and how ideally they're constructed for rats.
Well, this, as you say, that you weren't really targeting the rats, but more the kind of circumstances that made them just proliferate throughout the city. And I think that's at the same time, that's always been kind of your approach, is to look at the larger environment and how it's encroaching upon different organisms, different animals. For example, if we can go to the next slide, at the same time, you were doing works like these about acid rain. And you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, this is a couple of years later. Can I just go back a little bit and say that part of the book is dedicated to my hometown of Buffalo, because I grew up in the 50s and 60s at a time when the Rust Belt was kind of closing down. The signs were all there that the Rust Belt wasn't sustainable. And there are areas of Buffalo that are very beautiful today that you couldn't see back then because of all the pollution in the air from Bethlehem Steel. And also one of my favorite childhood memories was remembering how they declared Lake Erie dead in the 60s, which was really about the collapse of one insect, which was the mayfly that supported the sport fishing industry. And when that food source dried up and those fish disappeared, eutrophication set in, algae took over. And so I had conservative parents, but, you know, like all teenagers, I was very, you know, kind of angry and restless. And it just occurred to me from a very early age that what does it mean to be swimming in a dead lake, you know? And everyone else is swimming in a dead lake too. And I was aware that the language around environmental issues was being manipulated. I think we all were. It was impossible not to experience that. And it just began a life of curiosity really about the waste stream and its connection to habitat. And that's pretty much where I've been for the last 40 years. So going forward, what you had just had up was, my boyfriend and I had a chance to go to the Adirondacks in 1981, and I got up there and going like, what's wrong with this place? You know, and I had been reading about acid rain. And what's interesting to me about acid rain in general is everything looks normal. It's just that it disrupts the breeding cycle. So after 7 years, there are no more young. And I tried to represent in cardboard some, I kind of thought of them, you would like this, Eleanor, stations of the cross, of what happens when the fish can't breed anymore. And this was kind of a metaphor for childhood, not necessarily my own, but the adults are forced to consume their own young, but there's no baby fish for them.
And we have some more works from this. If we get the next slide, some of the other approaches that you took to this here as well.
Yeah, there were about 7 in this series, and the top left is one that's actually trying to spawn with a dead one, a dead trout.
Yeah, that's very tragic. It's a very tragic series.
Well, if you were a rainbow trout, that would be your story.
Yeah.
The one in the bottom left, you can't really see it, but all the little babies that did hatch died, and they're floating belly up because there's too much algae in the water to create enough oxygen. And actually, the one on the upper right is from another series that was that went on for a few years. I'd make a multiple every year about different ecological disasters.
Yeah, but you were dealing with other kinds of disasters too. If we can get the next slide. And this is, I remember this work. This was so dramatic. That we have, like, I think, what, two views of it. Well, let's stay on this one first. Right in the middle of New York by the Flatiron Building, all of a sudden this snail and this ear of corn. And I think, it really got a lot of attention. Do you want to talk about, first of all, what you were getting at here? And then I'd like to talk a little bit too about your approach to public art. So yeah, what tell us a little bit about your thinking here.
Well, I had visited Nicaragua with an artist group that I think Bob Holman was part of, called Ventana. And we had some cultural exchanges with the artists in Nicaragua. This is around the mid-'80s. And when the Public Art Fund asked me to do a piece, and they said, you can pick a site. And I saw this site at 5th Avenue, Broadway, and 23rd Street. It's the corner where the term 23 skidoo came from, because it was so hard to get across. It was really unsafe. And 5th and Broadway are coming down both one way. It was pretty frantic. It was. You
can see, yeah, maybe let's switch to the next slide. You can see the site better. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
this slide was taken really early in the morning. It's pretty peaceful. And notice how empty the skyline is. I think it's much busier above the buildings now. So I wanted to activate the site by creating the context of struggle. And corn was a symbol not just for Nicaragua, but for many Central American countries about agricultural sovereignty and history. And so I had studied snails. I knew they were very powerful, but very slow. They can pull 10 times their weight. So I got this image of this snail trying to pull a giant ear of corn up Fifth Avenue against the traffic, as though the streets were some kind of a stream that it was pushing against. And I don't think you can see it in this detail, but there were some worms on the ear of corn that were kind of eating the corn. And it was kind of a race between the traffic, the forces, and the parasites.
Did you get interesting responses to this work?
I did, yeah. And I was told repeatedly, you can't say anything about the Nicaraguan Revolution because, you know, we are at war with them, tiny little country. And and they told me this in the news, you know, they came out and asked me, and they said, if you say anything about that, we're not going to report it. So I just said, okay, this is about struggle. This is about parasites. This is social progress. And we're witnessing it.
Yeah. No, it was, I remember it. I remember it very vividly, actually. And I think, yeah, it was something about seeing that in the middle of this urban fabric it was just so striking. You know, and I want to, let's go on to the next image. I guess following that, no, maybe even a little bit earlier, I guess. One of the things that I think it's been kind of amazing about your work is the way that you use materials, that you use the materials that you use in your work are also about the thing that you're using, that you know, it's a very masterful way of, you know, the things that are killing us, the things that are destroying us, then are also kind of used to recreate the forms of the things that they are destroying. And you know, here, of course, we can see these are plastic bottles. A lot of your work has involved plastics, single-use plastic bottles, and of course, this remains a huge problem. In fact, maybe even more so now than it was then. Do you want to talk about this work?
Sure. So this was the early 80s. I guess I was reading a lot about water pollution at the time. And, you know, what's really interesting historically about these plastics have changed a lot and our perception of plastics has changed. But I think at the time, what I was really thinking about was the detergents and how harmful they were to the water supply. And at the same time, just a lot of admiration for the structure of these vessels that were kind of organic and made to fit our bodies, inexpensive, readily available. And I think there's another one.
Yeah, next image, yeah.
And I kind of thought about them as like a message in the bottle, kind of that we knew this plastic would be around forever, but I really kind of imagined these shells as transporters of information in a way. And also very beautiful, you know, and kind of inspiring as a sculptor to work
Well, you
with.
know, it's true. That's part of the irony. It's true that the plastics, yeah, they are beautiful. I mean, the colors and you know, we just don't know what to do with them, or most of us don't. You do. But okay, next slide, please. So, but you're also, I mean, I guess sort of, you know, working in a slightly different mode here. The creation of this glassware, which is, I mean, it's of course working with the same kinds of issues, but in a different way. What were these created for?
Well, this was actually a plea to drink tap water and not to use plastic single-use water bottles in 2000. And I had worked for the city's DEP on a public art project. It went on for 18 years and it was never built. And I learned a lot about the watershed and the harmless parasites that are in it. And at the time, you know, AIDS had been a big issue with people's immunity. And so I just kind of wanted to, at the same time as encouraging people to celebrate tap water, to think about tap water as a living thing with organisms in it. And this little duck here, at the time they were trying to, considering capping some of the reservoirs so that ducks wouldn't poop in the water and make giardia. They were talking about filtering the New York City watershed. You know, we have supposedly the cleanest, best water in the world, which I would agree with. And it's full of little living things, and that's not a bad thing.
Right.
So anyway, this was a celebration to kind of make you think about all the things it takes to make living water.
Yeah, wow. And maybe we'll talk a little bit later about what's going on up there in the Catskills now in terms of the watershed, because you and I both spent a lot of time up there. But first, let's go to the next image. This is actually, I love these. I mean, this series, this fast food chicken bones being used to create these endangered species. Again, you want to tell us about your thinking here?
Sure. Well, first of all, most people think every time they see a skeleton, they just assume it's a dinosaur. So I just want to go on record as saying, look more closely, it's not always a dinosaur, although you could make a case in this case that birds and dinosaurs are very connected. But anyway, what I was thinking about was, like, if you see a dodo in the Natural History Museum, you think time, you think this thing is really, really old. But actually, it's not really necessarily true. Our whole concept of time is a cultural construct. So just going back to the chicken, you know, a chicken today, a mass-produced chicken from egg to plastic container is about 5 weeks until they're fully ready for consumption. And their bones are really weak because they don't really need their bones when they don't have to walk, when they can't walk. So I thought if I could call attention to the living essence of what a chicken is. The chicken is here, it's now, we regard it as trash. We treat it as trash even when it's alive, and use it to kind of illustrate the stupidity of humans trying to repair something. Like, it's so much easier to destroy something than to repair it. And so I set about picking about 10 species that are known as extinct. And in those days, okay, so this is 20 years ago almost, the definition of extinction was it hadn't been seen in the wild in 50 years. But today, you know, more things have gone extinct probably since we started this conversation than you'd care to know. You know, I think it's hundreds and hundreds of species a day go extinct. So by repurposing these with a Dremel tool and studying the anatomy of a collection of extinct birds, I wanted to make them alive again, and to really talk about this notion of time, of how time collapses. When you see a skeleton, you think it's really old, but actually that's just a cultural construct.
And we have another one too, which is, I think, extremely poignant as well. Here, the dodo, which, as we all know, once was, I mean, they were just covered the landscape, and you know, we're all within a very short few decades, were completely, you know, killed to extinction. So.
Well, I'm not sure that's the dodo, although they are connected to pigeons. Carrier. I think you're talking about the carrier pigeon.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. A lot of species like the dodo, like a lot of the ones that I picked, there was nothing inherently wrong with their design. It's just their habitat changed. And in this case, it's a ground nesting bird. So as soon as the explorers arrived, they brought rats and cats and predators that, so in Mauritius, when this bird was laying its eggs, it didn't have a predator, and the bird didn't have a predator either, but the eggs did, the nest did. So yeah, so it's a dodo, and there are a lot of ground nesting birds that haven't survived for that reason. It's not because they're poorly designed. And you know, it's funny because when we see the dodo, especially in Alice in Wonderland, and it's really the poster child for extinction, we think, oh, that's such a funny looking bird. Its head is too big. You know, there surely was something wrong with it, you know, but it wasn't the bird, it was the environment.
Right, exactly. Well, there's, I mean, and there, it is a line kind of running through a lot of your work is, you know, sort of this disappearance of these beautiful things. For example, next slide, you know, the landscape, this beautiful landscape that we were given, and you know, what we're doing to it. And this is also, I think, something that I mean, it's based on an Asher Durand painting, but it's also about this very current threat to the environment, which it was averted in upstate New York, but who knows if it will come back. Yeah, you want to talk about this one? This is about fracking.
Yeah. Well, so this wasn't directly related to the fracking struggle because this is more about the bomb trains, which are the virtual pipelines. They can't really get permits to build pipelines in New York, but they get around it by having these virtual pipelines, which is a mile-long train of oil tanks. And sometimes they accelerate and crash. It's happened. There was a famous one in Canada that incinerated an entire town. But the Indians, the Native Americans had long ago predicted that the landscape would be overtaken by the black snake. And they have, at least in my mind, convinced me that this is the black snake. So I superimposed, I took some Hudson River paintings and I don't want to talk too much, but you know, if something is represented in an iconic painting, particularly in the Hudson River School, such as Indian Point, 3 Mile Island, if it's represented in the view shed, they can't build things in it. They can't build extractive industry. So it has a lot to do with the cultural construct of representing the landscape and maintaining. I'm not being very articulate about this, but I wanted to go back and place these things in the paintings to kind of talk about this idea of memory and expectation.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's get the next one, please. Now, this one is about fracking.
Yeah, and we're going back a little bit here, at least in my mind. Maybe that's not true. Yeah, so the fracking struggle, I think Eleanor was in on that. We had an amazing run of, I don't know, 7 years fighting the fracking industry, keeping them out of New York. And, you know, one thing you got to say about Andrew Cuomo, he did not cave. But it was ridiculous to think of fracking in New York when we have cleared out and condemned so many river towns for their water. You know, we've bought out farms, we've buried farms, bulldozed farms, just to keep the people out, keep the cows out. And then to turn around and let the fracking industry come in, draw all the fresh water they want. I don't know if people know how fracking works, but in order to create the fissures that bring up the gas, they have to send down a ton of water that creates a vacuum. It's called formation water, comes back up, and it's full of junk, chemicals, all kinds of carbon-based, fossil-based grit comes back up. So that water basically becomes garbage. And that's the real reason that fracking never happened in New York, because we didn't have a plan for getting any kind of storage for that water that comes up. We do, however,
no, go ahead.
However, buy it to put on our roads for in the winter for desalinization. I mean, there's all kinds of ways around it, and very connected to the plastics industry, because as we are transitioning now from fossil fuels into solar and wind, the fossil fuel industry needs desperately to figure out a way forward. And their plan is to use fracked gas to make plastic, to make packaging, to make insulation, to make all this stuff.
It just keeps destroying everything. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really insane when you think about it, taking clean water out of the ground to make a factory that makes air pollution, to make an end product that makes land and ocean pollution. I mean, really? For a product that passes through our hands in minutes. You know, we're willing to give up land because this land will never be used for organic farming again. And that was another issue in New York, was the valleys had the best land. The valleys flood seasonally. And if if you're downstream from a fracking site, you will never be organic certified ever again, because it penetrates into the microorganisms.
Yeah. Well, then there's dangers also. I mean, there's dangers to the reservoirs that then bring the water into New York City. And of course, so that may be more than anything else why the fracking ban held.
Yeah, there were a lot of very good reasons. I mean, if you fought against it, you had no shortage of good reasons why it was a terrible idea. But mainly, I mean, New York is posed, the whole Great Lakes region has 20% of the Earth's fresh water. That's comparable to the Amazon, which we're seeing now is threatened.
Yeah.
And the idea that, and it's happening everywhere, the bottling companies are moving in on the Finger Lakes. Anyway, it's the best resource that the Northeast has is our fresh water, and to use it, to dispose of it as though it's garbage is just sad. And we have to fight, we have to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, let's look at the next slide, which I think relates to this as well. Yeah.
Yes, so Thomas Cole, my favorite artist. And I'd like to just talk a little bit about art history. We'll come back to it, but do we know that the Hudson River School was the first American environmental art movement? And Thomas Cole was the first one. He was actually British. He lamented the cutting down of trees. So I like using his work as canvas to cut it up and kind of violate it. I don't know if you can see, this is the Catterskill Falls painting, but I made the black snake kind of all twisting around and in it. And he's an interesting artist because, he was not into reproducing the landscape. He was into imagining it, investing it with the sublime as God's work, which, if he's not like a photographer, not documenting it, if he's remaking it, that is kind of a religious effort, the artist as creator.
Right.
Yeah. So I like the idea of kind of trashing Thomas Cole, but to be fair to Thomas Cole, at the time when he was painting, Western scientists did believe that our landscapes were a result of the great biblical floods. They thought everything was a result of God's flood. So that was just commonly accepted then. So I guess if you really need to see God, I mean, we all see God, I don't want to go there, but anyway, it got me into this idea that art history is really subjective, and people show you what they want you to see. Like everything else, it's a cultural construct. And in his case, he wanted to equate nature and God. But somebody like, for instance, Walt Disney, I was raised in the 50s on Walt Disney nature movies. And of course, we all have our memory of the first time we saw Bambi's mother get shot. And so the Disney way of looking at things was man and nature are separate, and man therefore should be allowed to do whatever he wants. In fact, he kind of has an obligation because he's not really part of this. He's just kind of better somehow.
There's that whole concept of dominionism, which comes out of Genesis, that mankind, not womankind, mankind was given dominion over the flower, the plants of the earth, over, the everything basically. And that idea of dominionism, I think, it's threaded through our culture so profoundly. And as you say, it goes back to this idea of the separation between humankind and nature, which I think, you and a lot of people working in the environmental field now are trying to, they're trying to show in different ways, that in fact we are not separate, that we are part of the same thing. So, I mean,
but of course, Bambi didn't go to church,
No.
We care about him,
Yeah, exactly. Let's next. So let's go now back to some sculptures here. And again, the sort of fake ivory series. Tell us about these.
Well, I got interested in the connection between fossil fuels, endangered species, and the war machine. And I haven't really thought about this work in a while, and I didn't know we were going to talk about it, so I will do my best. But when there's an oil spill, there's a marker in oil. You can kind of tell, a scientist can determine where oil came from. So I tried to create some of the types of oil and kind of incise them like scrimshaw on some of these elephant tusks, walrus tusks, whale teeth. And kind of, so one thing that happens in Africa is there could be an empty plane going down with weapons for wars, for proxy wars, that then needs a product to fill up that plane on the way back. That could be ivory. So there really is, and also the extension of war into places where there are conflicts, weapons, automatic weapons, which are then used to poach. You know, they're intended for war, but they're used on these charismatic megafauna that actually are more valuable. And in fact, they call ivory white gold because it's worth more per pound. Yeah. So I really wanted to connect the disappearance of these megafauna as they live in places that are mined as well for oil.
Yeah, well, and yeah, again, it goes back to that dominionist notion that they're all just there for our use. And yeah, the sort of the tragic consequences of that. So, see, next, let's see, I think we have, a close up here that talks about what you were talking about. And then I'd like to skip on to the next image, which is to me one of the creepiest ones you've made here, this oozing sushi. It makes you never want to eat sushi again. Tell us about this.
Well, this was after the BP spill. It took me a couple of years to get ideas for it, but I just thought my first reaction to that was, what about all the seafood in the Gulf of Mexico? That's such a thing. That's that cuisine, that culture, and it is connected. I mean, there is a shrimp and oil festival. I mean, oil and shrimp is really connected. And if you want to read a great book, Antonia Yuhas may be familiar to some people, but she has covered the oil spill well. So basically what I was interested in was with the BP blowout, and how long did it go on? A couple of months underwater. It became one with the water and the plankton and all the small organisms, including the large ones too. Like a whale will swim through an oil slick if it smells like the direction it needs to go. It doesn't automatically know that oil is going to kill it. And of course they breathe on the surface, so it's fatal for them. But anyway, I wanted to imagine oily seafood just oozing, oil that we couldn't see. And again, trying to make it visible, something that you might know it intellectually, but you might not want to believe. They say you can wake someone up if they're asleep, but not if they're pretending to be asleep.
Mm. Well, and I think this also illustrates, and maybe just to step back a minute about your practice in general. And one of the things that I think has just been consistent throughout is, finding these very potent visual images to bring home, these, what can sometimes be very complex sort of technical and scientific issues. And so, that you, by the materials that you use and these kinds of imagery, and it's the thing, I guess, that, that art can do that science isn't necessarily so good at, is to give us those sort of graphic images that sort of become indelible in our mind and make us understand it on a level that's not just sort of theoretical or intellectual. And I think, that's one of the things that I think is just a through line throughout your work.
Well, habitat and waste is really, for me, that's the connection to pretty much all of this.
Yeah,
and then the connection to economics and exploitation.
right. Yeah, let's have the next issue, please. Image rather. So here
So,
again,
yeah, this is the brittle star, which is a small planktonic critter. You know, plankton could be animals or plants, and it's defined by something that's carried in the current, like some things like shrimp, or in this case, the brittle star, will develop navigation mechanisms. They'll develop fins and tails, but something else like a barnacle is plankton, but it'll just sink and attach to something. So plankton is a whole group of things that just float with the current, and they become part of the water column because everything eats them. You know, everything eats them one way or another. They either eat them as they're swimming, or they eat them once they're on the bottom of the ocean floor. And it's something that you will never clean up. There's no way to clean microscopic things. You know, you can disperse, you can put all the dispersant you want to make it look better, but you can't get the microplankton clean. There's just no way. And there's no way to harvest them. There's no way to, yeah, they can die, but then they'll still become food for something else.
yeah.
So it was just a way of kind of imagining it folding into the system.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the interconnectedness of all of this, which it's very easy for us to kind of ignore. And I think that's one of the things that your work is very good at bringing back to us. So I think we see again in the next slide, we can get the next image here, which is talking again, it's about species. And I mean, this one is actually a very interesting series because it's also related to art history. As were the Hudson River School works that you were talking about, but also, you know, about how we are endangering the birds through our waste stream. You want to talk about what's going on here?
Sure. I'm sure I'm not the only one that's ever brought home a bag of garlic or onions or potatoes and wondered what to do with the net bag that they came in. And I started, you know, the plastic net bags that are, sometimes they're great colors. Sometimes your Christmas tree, you might have one at home already. Your Christmas tree comes in this lovely white net bag that's supposed to help you get it up the elevator, which you then discard. And where you put it in the garbage, it'll end up maybe in the ocean. So I had started saving them, and actually, just like the bottles, started, the more you save, well, first I cut them up, and I was spending so much time disposing of them that then I decided to save them because it just seemed too important to throw away.
Yeah, and we have actually, next slide, we have a little picture of, yeah, close up here.
Right. Yeah, that's a lot of the Christmas tree stuff. So I'm wondering what to do with these things. What can I make with them? What would be a good use? And I decided to look at pictures of natural history historically and think about birds. I guess I was just into birds then. And I noticed that birds are usually represented as fighting or in conflict with man or defending their nests or just dead, or they're represented as food. And they're rarely represented, at least historically, for their wonder and complexity as animals. So particularly with the goldfinch that you just saw before this, which, can you go back? Because I forgot the date of it. It was like 1654. If you think about this little goldfinch, and everybody's seen a goldfinch, they're very tiny. It was in a pub in the Netherlands, chained to a perch with food, yes, but it had no way to get away from like loud, angry, it just lived in darkness in this pub and so vulnerable, you know, and that's how nature was perceived, as very, very vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that book, you know, The Goldfinch, I liked it. I read that afterwards, but to me, that book was all about vulnerability on a lot of different levels. So that's what I was getting at with these birds, is I was trying to recreate them. I'm not a painter, so I did my best.
And if we go, let's go to the next one after the mesh, which is, I mean, this one I think is really particularly beautiful. But yes, again, that same idea here, that, you know, this beautiful bird that is so threatened. And this is also from a painting too, right?
Yeah, they're all from painting. Well, except for the contemporary ones, some are sculptured. But this is called, it's from the Threatened Swan, which is a really famous painting. The Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands uses it as their kind of signature picture. I don't know if you remember it, but it was, sorry, I have a dog on my lap. It was a picture of a swan defending its nest against an encroaching dog. That's why it was threatened. And if you really look, it's a very dark painting. You can see the dog and you can see the nest. And it was a metaphor for political turmoil at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the birds that were really gestural were really fun to make. The ones that were very still were much harder to make.
Yeah.
And they were all pretty much life size, either the actual bird itself, or I tried to make it the exact size of the artwork.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, no, it's a very dramatic series. All right. So let's move on to here we have another a literary reference here, Moby Debris. And again, using trash. Tell us what we're looking at here.
Well, these again are plankton, and it got started. Well, I save plastics, and I will come get your plastic if you save it for me. I love doing this with people, sharing our plastics. I started this project trying to find what are the dimensions of the stomach of a whale, because I was thinking I wanted to make a life-size whale stomach, you know, just out freestanding. And now with the internet, you know, you can pretty much find stuff online, anything. But I couldn't learn about really the dimensions of a whale without learning about how much plastic is inside it when it dies. And it's often the cause of death when they wash up. So it occurred to me after I researched this for a couple of months that they were inextricably connected. That when you think of the stomach of a whale, it's like, okay, how much plastic can I stuff in there? You know, they're just one and the same. And yet plankton and krill is this tiny little microscopic critter, you know, and they need just tons and tons of it every day. And you know, seabirds and marine mammals, the reason that they ingest so much of this is that when plastics breaks down, it's very porous, and it becomes host to these microbial communities that smell just like plankton and food. And in fact, the surface is food material. That's why they're so prevalent. I mean, the fact that the ocean is full of it as well, but seabirds pick them up, particularly lighters, like Bic lighters. Somebody was saying they are about the right size of the fish that they like. Wow. So it looks like their food, it smells like their food. So anyway, I was trying to imagine in all of these, that's what's consistent, is kind of the navigation, anatomy, and in some way the behavior of these planktons. And
we have another, I think, next slide, and I think we have an animation, right, Anya? So maybe we can take a quick look at that. There's a quick little animation. But this is, yeah, you can see here in this again, I mean, all the different kinds of things that are sort of incorporated in here. And these are all things that are found inside of whales, inside of birds, inside of, you know, many creatures now. And it's like we're sort of making them weirdly bionic. It's a very strange thing that we're doing to nature. We're sort of.
Well, also, you know, the thing with it being microscopic is that we are plastic. You know, it's pretty hard for us not to eat plastic anymore. And a wonderful resource is Beyond Plastics with Judith Enck. And she has a wonderful website. She has established that we eat the equivalent of 1 credit card per week per person,
Wow.
which is why really a plant-based diet it's not a bad way to go. It's something we should be moving toward, besides the fact that we're eating everything wild.
Yeah, for many reasons. Yeah, exactly.
But so this one in particular was kind of, it's a new sort of direction where the drift net and the debris and the animal are all one thing, kind of forever swimming, killing each other,
Yeah.
and also making each other. But there should be a little animation, because I never really thought of these things. Anya, do you see an animation there anywhere?
Is it possible to get that animation going? I see there's a
Yes,
little-
yeah, Nick is going to pull it up in one
Okay.
moment.
Oh, okay.
I'm
All
having a bit of a Zoom issue, apologies.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go on to the next slide, and then when the animation comes, we can put it on. Now, this is a related series here.
Yes, so again, this was, I had a drawing of some fish embryos, how they develop, and they come out of a sac, an egg sac. And so in this series, I was just kind of connecting the egg sac to the organism in general, and trying to think of it all as one whole.
Right. We have a close-up of one of the images, if we can. Yeah, let's get that one here. And again, yeah, all the kinds of things that are in here. It's sort of amazing. Where do you get all this? Where do you
It's easy. I mean, one thing is really fun to just pick stuff up on the street. And the other is asking people to save it for me. And I found, I mean, not that this is really helping the waste stream at all, but I think it makes people more sensitive when you tell them, yes, I'm collecting plastic. They will save it. They want to save it. They don't want to throw it away.
Right. Well, and that sort of goes back to the question here we go. Yeah. Yeah, this is great.
And this series has, I've made some more of these too, because I want to make like a whole wall of them. And not really think of them as any individual sculpture, but more like the amazingly, the profusion of small animals that live around us.
Right. No, yeah. And so I want to go back to this question about kind of what art can do, what it is that when you're dealing with issues of, that of this nature that are just so pressing, but also, so technical, how art, what is it that art can do, and what, particularly, how do you connect with audiences? And I know this is something you think about a lot. What is it? How have you sort of formulated your work in relationship to those questions?
Well, I mean, everyone has their sources. For me, it's been science, and a lot of ecological artists are based in science. And what I learned early on, back when I was studying roaches at the Museum of Natural History, is science really demands accuracy. And if it can be disproven, it's invalid. And science needs answers. But art can ask the questions. We can be subjective and expressive, and we can be wrong, and it doesn't negate our commitment. Artists can work outside the barriers of professional gatekeepers, and we can work in a cross-disciplinary way without losing professional credibility.
Right.
Something like climate, for example, is very hard for a scientist. There's a great book about this. Amitav Ghosh, The Great Derangement, talks a lot about how hard it is to imagine climate change. And it's much easier to think of it in terms of this apocalyptic ending, crash bang. But it's really a very quiet thing that's happening, right? That we're in the process of seeing right now. Artists can work with that. We can work with that expression, that emotion, that subjectivity.
Yeah.
And the same thing as habitat loss. I think that's my thing, is because it's so hard to prove a negative. Just because something isn't there, you can't necessarily prove it's gone. So like if you're a scientist, it'd be very hard to prove it. But if you're an artist, you can kind of claim that you saw that, and nobody will doubt you.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And the last question I want to ask is just how do we all stay hopeful in the midst of all of this?
I think that's a very good question. Well, I don't know. I'll just tell you, if you look at the history of geology, which I'm sure everyone here has sort of thought about, we have done in 200 years, or since the Industrial Revolution, what eons, years, eras have. The human impact is immeasurable. It's beyond the Anthropocene. It's really, we've taken the planet. We're really putting it in a blender. I don't really understand any reason why we belong here if we can't use our intelligence to create technological ways, like just scaling back our need for comfort. If we can't redeem ourselves that way, I don't really see a future for us. And that may not be any of us or our grandchildren, but if you really think about how long the Earth has been here and the damage that's been done in the last 150 years, there's really no reason to believe that we are belonging in the future.
Well, there's a
So
weird.
how do we remain hopeful? I guess we try to understand that, and we use our skills to teach it, and we kind of hope that the human ability for communication will somehow get the memo and get on board with the solution.
And if it doesn't, there is a book and a film, The World Without Us, which has a weirdly hopeful thesis, which is that if we were to disappear tomorrow, actually the rest of the planet would come back pretty well. So it's a I guess from a very large, long perspective, that's actually oddly comforting.
Well, when you look at extinction events, like say a volcano or a meteor or an ice age, everything shut down for like 10 million years until some little photosynthesis thing in some pit started bubbling. And that was really a long time.
Right.
That's not human scale time.
Right. Yeah. So we have to maybe think beyond that, or think that and beyond that at the same time.
Well, it would be helpful if we thought beyond human scale time, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I think everything revolved around us.
Yeah. Well, dominionism again. Yeah. I think that it's at 2:00. And so it's probably a good time to open up to questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eleanor and Christy, for this conversation. We have some really great questions from the audience. Our first question will be coming from Aviva Ramani, and you should be able to turn on your microphone.
Yeah, thank you, Christy. I love your work and I love your objects. And I can't resist correcting you, Eleanor, that the Bible did not invent dominionism. It was a mistranslation from the Aramaic, but that's a whole other conversation. What I'm interested in is the fact that so many eco artists are using research as material. And so much of what you have to say is so thoughtful, it's so intelligent, it's so wise, and it's beautifully articulated. And as you know, many of our colleagues are writing their own books with tons and tons of interesting text. You've chosen to focus strategically on just making objects. It seems honestly to me a loss that you're not also writing some of the text. So could you talk a little bit to this choice of your strategy?
Well, I would love to be writing the text. And I really kind of think at some point in my life, I'd like to write stories, because I do get these stories all the time. I get these ideas for stories, more imaginative stories about discovery. I think there's enough people doing it, Aviva. I don't have to do that.
You say something different. We each have a different perspective, and your point of view has a lot of content to it that's unique. And it's very different than when Eleanor writes. She's looking at art from a very different perspective. Looking to the research from the point of view of an artist is a very different process, I think. And I think you're underestimating the value of your content there.
Well, thank you. I don't feel very articulate for writing, but I mean, one thing I will say in defense of making objects is I like making things that are accessible to kids and people that don't speak English. You know, I've always kind of had an interest in communicating visually. So I guess that's where my energy is more, but thank you. Thank you for the prompt. I will consider that. I can't write as well as you, that's for sure.
Thank you, Aviva, for that lovely question and hype up comment. Our next question will be coming from our friend GE, and you can turn on your microphone now.
Hello, thank you so much. I first saw your work at the Birchfield Penny Center in Buffalo many years ago when my friend Edward Ludwig, who wrote the groundbreaking People at Zoos, a sociological approach, took me, and he was studying animal and human relationships at zoos at that point and before the late 80s or late 70s, early 80s when I was interning with him. And they concluded that zoo visitors had a desire to be amused often rather than be educated. And do you see sometimes parallels with your work in art that people want to be amused sometimes more than they want to be educated, even in this crucial time that we're living through?
I mean, I can see there's a role for both things. And I can see why amusing people doesn't have to be like turning on the TV. You know, it can be more interactive and more alive.
I think you can do both. And in fact, maybe that's what should be, because people want to be amused. And so then they can also learn something.
They don't want to be bullied. They don't want to be hit over the head. I like to point people in a direction and hope that they're curious. Make them curious.
Thank you. Thank you so much, G, for that question. Our next question will be coming from Nina Felshen, and you can turn on your microphone.
Hey, all of you. My questions actually relate to some of the questions that have already been asked. And Aviva, your question about, or your comments about text and writing. One of the things I love about Christy's work is that it's very evocative and poetic. And I think that, and this is unusual among eco artists these days. I think a lot of work is, and this is not a criticism necessarily, but can be quite didactic. And I think what I love about, I asked these questions, but clearly I have my answers. I think Christy is very generous to the viewer, and I think she welcomes projections by the viewer of what they make of it. And for me, that sort of explains why they're just objects, and that text and description is absent. I think this is a very almost unique these days among artists who are doing work that actually is quite political. And for me, as a former more or less retired curator, who did a lot of exhibitions that were, dealt with politically engaged, socially engaged issues, for me, poetry is very critical to the success of a work of art. And so that's what I have to say. So I guess there was no question there, but anyway, just comment.
I want to thank Nina for her great essay on plastics in the book. and really pulling us back into the graduate and remembering that very famous line from The Graduate, which according to Nina or somewhere is the most famous line in movie history. People know the quote, right?
I also, can I just say one other thing while I'm on? I think one of the other really terrific things about Christy's work is that, and I did put a comment in the chat about, the work, for example, about rats. I've been following this very closely because I live next door to a construction site right now, and rats have been a big issue. And I just learned quite recently that sanitation department pickups have been reduced. So her work is so timely. It just doesn't lose its import. It's not about a moment. It's about a universe, really.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Nina, for those great contributions.
Thank you.
For your contributions to the book. Our next question will come from our very own Nick Bennett. Nick, I'd like to turn on your microphone.
Thank you, Anya. And thank you so much, Christy and Eleanor, for this conversation today, and for everyone else for asking your questions. I hope my question is quite simple, sort of building off of what Aviva and others have said. Being an eco-artist, or if you choose to kind of use that term, it requires you to do research and to interact with those in other fields, particularly in science. And Christy, I'm just curious if this is connected to and how it's connected to being a teacher, and how that working with students would involve, how that affects your work and what the relationship like is there.
Well, it's great. I mean, as I said earlier, it's about coming up with the questions, not the answers. And that's a great springboard for students because there's really no wrong answers that way. It's about curiosity. I think there's also a lot of room for entry-level thinking here, not expert level, or there should be.
Well, I think, yeah, you make you make complex issues. You give them this visual form that simplifies them to a point that they can really be communicated. I mean, I think that's what's really wonderful about your work.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I love that we're bridging these gaps here. So thank you so much, Christy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I want to thank you both again for this wonderful conversation, and everyone for all of their comments and questions. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending these community events with a poetry reading. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Bob Holman, to the stage. An American poet and poetry activist, Bob Holman is equal parts spoken word performer, professor, impresario, activist, proprietor of the Bowery Poetry Club, filmmaker, and host of Language Matters and Beyond. Author of 17 poetry collections, he was described by Henry Louis Gates Jr. in The New Yorker as the postmodern promoter who has done more to bring poetry to cafes and bars than anyone since Ferlinghetti. Bob is a contributor to the Brooklyn Rail. His two recent books, The Unspoken and Life Poem, were written 50 years apart. So Bob, take it away.
Okay, let's take it away. Hi, everybody. Christy, Eleanor, just, so great to see the work. And then we get, the soundtrack with you guys. I'll read the poems because they have all the answers in them as usual. This first one, We Are the Dinosaur, as Christy picked out to put in the book, and I'm very happy about it because we are the dinosaur. Excuse me. Blast open the gates to kingdom come. Whoops, what happened to everyone? I planted a seed, it grew into a gun. Dum, da-dum, dum, 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 dum. Life is a riot living in a cartoon. Ice age in a dumpster, that's our living room. Set fire to your roof, get a better view. Global warming's a warning, toodaloo. We are the dinosaur. We don't live here anymore. We got what we were asking for. Come on, follow the dinosaur. Homo sapiens, you ain't so smart. Kamikaze friend, which way is the ark? The whole world's dialing 911. The don't walk sign just changed to you better run. What we've been waiting for has long since come. Dum, da dum, 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 dum. Across the scorching sands with my big fat feet. It's hard becoming diesel fuel with nothing to eat. You better catch us quick. We're out of here. We're pre-winged birds. We tend to disappear. Oh, chauffeured ambulances racing to the prom. Santa, please bring me a neutron bomb. Recycle the planet before the earth is a grave. But you gotta excuse me. Must get back to my cave. We are the dinosaur. We don't live here anymore. We got what we were asking for. Come on, everybody. Follow the dinosaur. Okay. Well, I'm going to do another one for you out there. Oh, I love the silent applause. It's going to be my answer to Rachel Carson's book. Let's see, where did this one go? Oh, there it is. Okay, well, I thought I'd go back to another historical epoch to conclude this reading. Some of you may have heard of it even. This poem is called 1990. It does remind me of these days, but then these days, everything's reminding me of these days. Slip under the COVID curtain with me. The taking of flash photos and use of recording devices of any kind, including pens and pencils, eyes and ears, is strictly encouraged. It's 1990, and Nelson Mandela is free, and people are looking at each other and they're going like, what? And the other people are looking back and they're going like, duh. And finally, after this deep interaction, you hear the wild cry of, excuse me, can you tell me the time? What time is it? It's wake and shake time. It's death of the decade time. It's turn of the century time. It's gyrate the millennium time. It's the end of time. At the sound of the tone, it will be the end of time. It's 1 PF. It's post-future. It's 1 PT. It's post-time. It's post-time. It's 1990 and Nelson Mandela is free. And history's on fast forward. Make that double fast forward. That you run past the future so fast, you're back in the past. Sure, it's the end of history. So how come all we can think is, what comes next? 1 minute you're rolling in ecstasy because the Berlin Wall is tumbling down, and the next you're thinking of reunited Germany. Oh God, no, here come the stormtroopers, and I'm Jewish. Well, my father was Jewish, so I'm not Jewish enough for the Jews, but I'm Jewish enough for the Nazis. 1 minute it's survival tactics, and the next it's where's the angle? It's 1990. And Nelson Mandela is free, and everybody wants a little glasnost. We know we want it because we see Frank Zappa smoking cigarettes with Václav Havel, who 6 months ago was in jail, an artist whose work was banned by the government. Now he's the president of, do you remember? Czechoslovakia. So stop in for free baby burritos at the corner bar, except suddenly it's a karaoke sushi bar specializing in piranha sushi. And everybody here's a star because you got to stand up in front of the massive TV screen showing an MTV-1 video clip and sing along with a bouncing ball, except the words are all in Japanese. And how can you sing feelings with feeling in Japanese? Kanjuru, watashi wa Kanjuru. It's 1990 and Nelson Mandela is free and communism has collapsed. At last, the Russians get to wear the happy face masks and stand in line for a Big Mac. The Azerbaijanis are finally free, so they get to beat up on the Armenians. Yugoslavia has decided to go back to indigenous cave tribe groupings. In Italy, the communists have met and decided they're not communists. They're going to change their name to be more appealing to the socialists and the Greens. But for the time being, they're calling themselves simply the Thing. The Thing. Personally, I think I'm going to Vote for the thing. For the time being, there's nothing left anymore except for the time being, while you live your whole life for the time being. And meanwhile, there's no meanwhile. It's 1990 and Nelson Mandela's free. Play ethics by ear. Let me out of here. Which way is out? I'm a part of the food chain. Isn't that enough? The world is changing and we're not. Hey, we're stuck in a commercial for life, trying to figure out who to give the money to when, surprise, there's no money. It's 1990 and Nelson Mandela is free. Signor Yappi, it's a phone call for Signor Yappi. Excuse me, I have to step over these homeless people to close on my home equity loan. Oh, our bodies are still tender and not full grown, and the prospect of dying frightens us all. But history calls us and we must go on. But where did they go? The Chinese students on their bicycles riding towards the tanks in Tiananmen Square. It can't happen here because it's already happened here. AIDS epidemic grabs life till we don't even see it, gone like holes in heart, surrounded by ghosts. Lesbians and gay men still have to fight for the right to love. And be sure to send your poetry to the Department of Official Bullshit to get labeled. So it just has to be time to get a co-op. That's right. You buy the place you used to rent and you still get to pay the rent. You know, it's time to be a great parent and work the extra hours to pay for the best child care while you're away. My kid is majoring in Nikes. Don't worry. Don't be happy. Explode. The decision of birth from her body is solely and privately that of the woman herself. It's 1990 and Nelson Mandela is free and everything used to be something else. Now it's 1,000 words a minute and Times Square is just so much more interesting. We're hell-bent on something sort of positive in a senile way. I can't even keep up with my life. It's a secret between me and my stunt double. Honey, I'm home, nuke me, hop to it, ban cigarettes before it's too late. It's Earth Day again, if you can find any Earth left. Paranoia used to be a psychosis, now it's a national pastime. Have you tried the new fashion of the bare breast style of no clothes at all? And it's not cheap either. And poetry is a newspaper of the future, except it's locked out of the media. You know things, think them. There's optimism at the yacht club. The salad bar is open. Excuse me, isn't it time to mow your head? I hate you. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. They don't even know what it is, but they've already got an option on it. They're buying into it. Let's not make a deal. It's 1990 and Nelson Mandela is free. And there's this guy at the microphone and on the screen and he's yelling at me and he's not using any language that makes any sense from where I come from. It all rhymes and it all starts with capital letters. It's all intense italics, underlined 3 times in boldface headlines. And all I can remember anyway is that part about how it's 1990 and Nelson Mandela is free. And around the world, a sense of possibility as women slowly ease the old gray dinosaur poobahs from their penile thrones. The universal remote control is being passed into your hands. Zap it, zap it, zap it, zap it, zap it. It's 2021. And I got grandkids and they give me hope. But let me tell you, Christy Rupp and John Sims and Carrie Finley and people like that in the Brooklyn Rail here, they, you know, I don't know about hope, but they certainly help me hone my sense of irony. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Bob. Thank you. That's such an excellent way to close out this event. So appreciate you being here for the 2nd week in a row. Thank you. And thank you again, Christy and Eleanor and everyone who came here and helped make this event possible. Thank you, Mandala Publishing and Simon & Schuster. And I encourage all of you to go grab a copy of Noisy Autumn, Sculpture and Works on Paper, which I will post another link to in the chat. We also encourage everyone to view our archive of these conversations on our YouTube channel, where we're going to upload today's event. And you can join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation between Paulina Alowska and Jason Rosenfeld on the occasion of our exhibition, House Proud on View at Metro Pictures. We'll conclude with a poetry reading from Gia Gonzalez. And so now you should all be able to turn on your microphones and say thank you and goodbye. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Christy, thank you, Eleanor.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank you.
Bob.
Great, a
Thank you,
great.
Bob.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Congrats.
Thanks for that great
Christy.
poem, Bob.
Thank you.
Really
Oh,
awesome.
boy.
Thank you,
Beautiful.
Nina. Thanks, GE. Thanks, Lynn.
Hey.
See you all tomorrow at 1.
Thank you.
Be safe.
you.
Take care.
Be safe, everyone.
Let's go
Happy
have lunch.
Monday.
Okay.
Bye,
Lunch.
everyone.
I'll be home soon, Christy. I'll see you then.
Ciao, y'all.